Welcome back to A Slice of News, where I cut you off a slice of news in the 150th episode of A Slice of News. I was really hoping to have some sort of good news to discuss on this milestone episode, but instead I'll have to talk about the fact that the Virginia Supreme Court has struck down the voter-approved redistricting map, eliminating the Democratic advantage and handing Republicans back a little bit more power in a time where they are stealing all the power they possibly can. In the wake of the Louisiana versus Calais Supreme Court decision, Republicans have had a field day redistricting every single state they could to favor Republicans in every single state they possibly can. Tennessee recently changed their electoral map to one which has essentially zero blue districts and is entirely red. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis introduced a map for Florida that is essentially the same thing, a ruby red Florida with virtually no blue on it whatsoever. What's interesting with Florida is that back in 2010 they posted the Fair District redistricting standard, which made it unlawful to redraw congressional or state legislative maps for partisan gain or to help and hurt incumbents. So you'd think, based on their own law that their own voters passed, that this would be illegal. But I guess laws only apply in Florida when they are ruling against Republicans. When it's in their favor, they don't really seem to matter. Where that ends up going is still yet to be decided, but I'm willing to bet the all-red Florida map is probably what we're going to see in the next election. But anyway, back to Virginia. The Virginia Supreme Court ruled 4-3 essentially that because Virginia law requires amendments to move through two General Assembly sessions, one before the House had an election and one after, that because the amendment had been advanced after early voting for the 2025 House elections had already begun, the referendum was, quote, incurably tainted and invalidates the vote that Virginia voters made approving the redistricting. Basically, they use a technicality to invalidate it. Virginia's Republican representatives unsurprisingly celebrated the ruling, championing the win for the rule of law and how Democrats had broken the law, and this was reaffirming that the Virginia Constitution means what it says. And of course they were happy about it. The new map would have eliminated 4 of their seats. But of course it seems massively hypocritical of them to celebrate the failure of this redistricting when members of their own party in other states gleefully do the exact same thing in their own benefit, which really reaffirms the feeling that Republicans only oppose redistricting when it doesn't favor them. When it is on their side, they are perfectly fine with it and will defend it at any opportunity. The Democrats in Virginia were understandably a little bit less celebratory and felt that the Supreme Court decision was flat out wrong, and that they were essentially throwing out the voice of the people in favor of preserving Republican representation in the state. Some have said that the Supreme Court of Virginia had read the Virginia Constitution in such a way that favored their viewpoint, when in fact it did not, that the necessary procedures were followed, and that as the dissent in the ruling stated, every previous federal circuit that considered the question had upheld that early voting is not part of the election and therefore should not be considered as a factor to invalidate the referendum that the voters passed. As a result, I think outrage at this decision is absolutely justified. This is definitely taking the will of the Virginian voters and tossing it out. But when you realize that the Virginia Supreme Court has 5 conservative-leaning judges to 2 liberal ones, this decision makes a little bit more sense. To say this decision wasn't politically motivated in any way, it was purely going along the lines of the law, really doesn't hold up to scrutiny. It is very clearly this was made to help Republicans in the state. And claiming this was just about procedure and not following the proper steps is laughable. The Virginia Supreme Court ruling is wrong, and in different circumstances would probably be grounds to send it to the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn it. But with only 6 months before the midterm elections, there's likely not enough time to craft a good argument to present before the Supreme Court. Even if they did, the conservative-leaning Supreme Court would likely uphold this lower court decision, and it would likely be a fruitless attempt, even if it were undertaken. This ruling has left a lot of people in Virginia and across the country feeling very despondent, because it really feels like rules and procedures and decorum only count when it's Democrats trying to get something done, but when it's Republicans wanting something, all the rules are out the window and all bets are off. They can just do whatever they want, and there's just no consequences for them. Louisiana canceled an already ongoing primary simply so they could remove the only black district in their state, in a state where nearly 33% of its population are black. Republicans have shown time and time again that all they care about is winning, and how they get it does not matter. Doesn't matter if it's fair or even if it's legal. As long as they get their advantage, that's all that matters. So it is unbelievably frustrating when Democrats just follow the rules and do things the way they're supposed to be done, and every single time they seem to lose because they're going up against the other side that has no interest in doing that. Which is why many are saying the answer here is for Virginia to just ignore this ruling. Use the map anyway. If Republicans are habitually going to break rules and fear no consequence, maybe it's time Democrats do the same. Republicans have shown that disobedience to the laws and rules and procedures works, so why not? And I have to say that idea is incredibly tempting. Democrats have always been the by-the-book party, that always about being fair and right and doing what the rules say and following them to the letter whenever possible. But it feels like all that's ever gotten them is stepped on and beaten down, because Republicans don't care about the rules and they don't care about following them. So if they could ignore rulings that don't favor them, why can't Democrats do the same thing? But the simple answer is because it would probably not go in their favor. It's tempting to say, well, Republicans do it, so why not us? The answer is because right now we have a conservative-led Supreme Court, a conservative-controlled government. Just ignoring the court and going with the map that the Virginia voters voted for could at least in theory open up the door to having the entire thing considered illegitimate because they defied what the court had ruled and used an illegal map. And in a time where the president and his fellow conservatives would love to throw away as many Democratic votes as possible, that simply doesn't feel like a risk worth taking. Many have been very angry that Democratic leadership has voiced their displeasure and outrage at the ruling, but also pledged to abide by that ruling. They feel this is yet another example of the weakness of the Democratic Party, that they'll just lay down and take it. They won't even fight back. And while I understand that anger and that feeling, I feel like perhaps that may be it. Not that they don't want to fight back against it, but they see the potential greater loss that might be had if they did push back in a way that simply ignored the ruling. It's not that they can't or won't see what's going on, it's that they do see it and see a few moves ahead of what could happen if they try adopting the Republican strategy of just do whatever you want for themselves. In light of this ruling and the bigger Supreme Court ruling, I think it's important to remember that land doesn't vote, maps don't vote, people vote. And while this ruling does feel like a setback towards evening the playing field when it comes to electoral maps, we all still have the power to go out and vote and make our voices heard. Many were critical of Democratic leadership for saying that the focus should now be on voting in November instead of focusing on how to get around this unfair court decision. But I think that that's probably the better strategy. The reality is that there really isn't enough time to formulate a solid counter to this ruling in time to make a difference in the midterms this November, focusing instead on getting a majority of voters out there voting Democrat instead of staying home as they did in 2024 may be the real best solution on how to move forward from this decision. Around 36% of the voter-eligible population of this country just did not vote in the presidential election of 2024. And while it's hard to say for sure how many of those 89 million potential voters would have voted Democrat, it's safe to say a lot of them most likely would have. And if even just a portion of those potential Democrat voters had exercised their right to vote in that election, things might be looking very different right now. So with the consequences of their inaction laid bare, and it being very obvious what will happen if they once again choose to stay home on election day, or choose not to fill out and mail their ballot, maybe they can be convinced to actually do it and make the difference that they didn't make 2 years ago. Maybe the answer on how to fight back really is just to vote and have as many people as possible vote. As much as it doesn't really feel like it sometimes, the party whose voters vote for them the most are the ones that win. Just because the maps are being redrawn in ways that favor Republicans doesn't mean they automatically will win. Electoral maps don't automatically decide who has already won before the election has even happened. Conservatives will do whatever they can to convince Democratic voters that they've already lost, that the Republican power grab has already happened, and so their votes don't even matter. But that could not be farther from the truth. Even with these unfairly Republican-drawn electoral maps, Democrats are still on track to win, and win big. It's why Republicans were in such a rush to redraw these maps in the first place, because they are so desperate to convince Democrats that their chances of winning are lower now, when they aren't. As long as their voters come out and vote for the Democratic candidates, and a lot of those non-voters start voting. The game is not up, and Republicans still can lose, and will, as long as Democrats come out and vote, in Virginia and all over the country. Yes, the conservative-leaning Virginia Supreme Court striking down what voters voted for is incredibly disappointing, but it is not the end. The upcoming midterms can still be big wins for Democrats as long as the voters go out and vote. And no court ruling, be it by the state Supreme Court or the national Supreme Court, can change that. Alright guys, that'll be it for this 150th episode of A Slice of News. I've been your host, Mr. Slice, and until next time, when I cut you off, another slice of news. And don't forget to rate and review the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find it.